Michael, thank you so much for joining us on the Daily Aus. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Emma.
We're talking today about the Global Peace Index. First of all, I wanted to understand, what is the index?
So the Global Peace Index is essentially a method or a tool to be able to measure changes in peacefulness globally. So peace, for the most part, at least historically, has been sort of thought about as something fuzzy around the edges. Everyone has their own definition of peacefulness. So it's very much an aim to be able to sort of provide a bit of a data-driven perspective as it pertains to peace and changes in peacefulness around the world.
So how do you define peacefulness?
So one of the easiest places to start, or at least where we chose to start with this, is measuring, in this instance, the opposite. And we start by measuring this absence of violence or fear of violence. So we take things like homicide measures, for example, numbers of violent demonstrations, the amount of conflict in countries, the levels of incarceration, and then we bring all of those different metrics together. The premise of this is most peaceful countries are the ones that have the lowest measures in all of those different indicators as well.
So essentially, the lower the score, the more peaceful the place.
That's absolutely right. So to make all of this different data comparable, what we do is we go through this process of banding, scores everything from 1 to a 5. It's a bit of a convoluted and complex process, but it really helps kind of simplify what are a lot of complex sort of dynamics and indicators. In a nutshell, yes. If you're living in a 5, things aren't so great right now.
We're talking today specifically about the latest findings, the 2024 index out this week. Can you talk me through some of the key insights from this year's report?
Yeah, absolutely. First off is that peacefulness is deteriorating, in particular conflict measures. And worse still, those conflict measures or those conflicts are essentially becoming more and more difficult to resolve over time. But, we're looking at the largest number of conflicts that we have seen since the end of World War II. Essentially. So 56 conflicts around the world. Yes, conflicts such as Gaza and the Ukraine, those countries in the headlines do weigh significantly on those particular drivers. There are lots of other conflicts out there, so the Sudan, Ethiopia, Myanmar that we also hear about, but as well as many others that we are not hearing about at all. The last point I sort of want to make on that is we've delved in this year a bit on a lot of those dynamics. We see that a lot more countries are more readily getting involved in other countries' conflict, whether that be in direct support of the government in that country or alternatively armed groups within that country as well. And that's creating quite a mess. The amount of peace agreements that are signed these days has also deteriorated significantly. The end result of this is that there are a whole lot of unresolved conflicts around there as well. And it's those smaller unresolved conflicts that have the potential to be able to sort of beef up and to blow up into the major conflicts that we're seeing today.
That figure you mentioned, the highest number of countries engaged in conflict since World War II, is pretty staggering. How significant is the scale of that number of conflicts and why now?
So again, I think that this is all progressive. To put things in context slightly, we are talking in terms of overall battle deaths and numbers that are a lot lower than what we would have seen in the Cold War, for example. So in terms of overall battle deaths. That said, we've seen an increase in that in the last 2 or 3 years. So since the inception of the Global Peace Index, we saw the record in battle deaths. This was back in 2022. 2023 was close to this mark. 50,000 people have died in the first 4 months of this year. So we're perhaps going to hit a new sort of record for the Global Peace Index. But going back in time, we're still lower on those overall numbers. But again, this really speaks to this broader set of conflicts that there is a whole likelihood now that any one of those individual conflicts, which yesterday was a minor conflict, if we think about Ethiopia, if we think about Ukraine, if we think about Gaza, those were all minor conflicts back in 2019, and look where we are today.
Do you expect to see that trend of what were previously minor conflicts becoming major ones? Do you expect to see that trend continuing, intensifying into, more record-breaking numbers next year?
Yes, it's always a difficult prediction to make, but in terms of the law of large numbers and what we're seeing in terms of trends, that is definitely what we would expect, that out of some of those smaller conflicts, we would see more major conflicts arise, unless anything radically changes on the world stage. I really don't see that happening anytime soon.
There are, of course, dozens of global conflicts at play with the data this year, but I think it would probably be remiss of us not to dive a little deeper into Gaza, the conflict there, of course. You've been tracking these findings over a period of years. How have you seen things change and shift given the intensification of that conflict?
Definitely an intensification in terms of the terrorist attack, which was the largest terrorist attack worldwide since September 11th. And then, of course, the Israeli response in Gaza with over 30,000 Palestinians killed to date. So certainly a massive escalation in a very short period of time.
Hello, I'm James and I produced the video you're watching. If you're enjoying what you're watching, we'd love it if you considered subscribing and checking us out on our other platforms. It'd really help in getting the word out about what we're doing here at TDA. Thanks very much, and now back to the deep dive.
I'm interested in understanding the scope of military spending in contributing towards these results. How does military spending kind of stack up compared to peace building or peacekeeping spending internationally?
So militarization is something that we would track as a negative. In this instance, the exception to that would be precisely what you mentioned, Emma, which is peacekeeping or peace-building contributions, primarily through UN frameworks, which are more consensus-based, basically as a proxy to commitment to peace-building. Now, whether that's done at the same time or not is the core question. And I think a lot of the increase in militarization that we're seeing over the recent 3 or 4 years is in response to specifically this large amount of conflict that we're now seeing around the world. So it's perhaps a logical response as well. But ultimately, war doesn't pay.
One of the interesting findings to me was learning that the US has more significant military power than China. Did that come as a surprise to you and the team?
I don't think it came so much as a surprise to me. Personally, I'm not too sure if the team would have thought different, perhaps. I spend a lot of time living in the US, so I spend a lot of time hearing how great the American military is.
Makes sense. I think for context for us here at home, Asia-Pacific tensions are, a big part of the news cycle, and that certainly dominates the dialogue here from a defence perspective, and a lot of foreign spending and military spending from the Australian government tends to be built on a sort of rhetoric about the imposing fear and growth and power of China.
And again, that is totally understandable. Yes, I think Americans would be relieved to see that they have still 3 times the capability, at least along those lines, than China would have. But one of the interesting things, I should say, is actually the significant increase in military capacity that China has had over the last 5 years. So although it's still well below the United States, it's growing in capacity very, very quickly indeed.
I want to talk to you about some of the more hopeful findings from the index. Who or where was the most peaceful country in 2023?
So the most peaceful country in 2023/2024 was Iceland. Iceland has been the most peaceful country since the inception of the Global Peace Index. In fact, it's so far ahead that it would take quite a bit of deterioration for that to actually swap. It's not that there's any, as far as we can see, there's not any magical transformative power of being in Iceland. It's just an accumulation of circumstances. In fact, Iceland did deteriorate in peacefulness this year, including an increase in violent demonstrations, for example. And there are a lot of other peaceful countries around the world. So Ireland, Austria, New Zealand, Singapore, Switzerland, Australia does relatively well as well.
So given that, what does Australia need to do to improve its peacefulness?
We definitely offer something like the positive peace framework as a tool for individual countries, societies, communities, neighborhoods, and even organizations to be able to assess where they fall on the peace diagram and to score themselves around these particular pillars. And the reason that we often don't participate in direct policy recommendations is precisely because a lot of this positive peace building is contextual in nature.
I'm wondering if climate change is disrupting peacefulness perhaps in a country like Australia, where our natural landscape seems to bring so much pride and joy to a lot of people's life. I wonder if that has a role to play.
It does, in the sense that that is something that we can very much validate through our work. So parallel to the Global Peace Index, for the last 5 years now, we've been producing a report called the Ecological Threat Report. Now, it doesn't look at climate change uniquely. What it does is it looks at levels of food insecurity, water stress, natural disasters, and rapid population growth. But all of these things, other than rapid population growth and perhaps earthquakes, are things that could be and are aggravated by climate change. The reason I'm bringing that up is because we do see a very close correlation between ecological degradation and deteriorations in peacefulness as well.
Michael, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're very excited, and thanks for the opportunity.